Thank you. Thank you, Heidi, who, by the way, I think we almost share a birthday, so just want to make that point.
But I look so much younger.
That's for sure. That's for sure. We're so grateful for your presence here as our director. And Anne-Marie Lipinski, I remember when she walked in the door at the Chicago Tribune as an intern from the University of Michigan. I had been an intern a few years earlier, and I ended up leaving and becoming a hack, and she ended up being editor of the newspaper. So, but it's so great to see you, and we're grateful for your partnership. And great to see all of you who've come to present, and all of you who have come to participate. When I was at the Tribune, I covered national politics, and it was so different and so much easier in many ways than the task that you all face. And our job in this conference is to make you smarter, those of you who are covering your first campaigns, and to bring you up to date and perhaps bring ourselves up to date as to what is new, what is different, and what is it that you're not seeing that you should be seeing as you cover these campaigns. So the first question I have for you guys, and I'm so grateful to you both for being here. You're both no strangers to the Institute of Politics, and we're so grateful for that, is what if you must sit there as party chairs and as practicing politicians during a presidential campaign and read stuff and watch stuff and say, man, they're just not getting it. They don't, there's stuff going on they're not getting. What is the most important thing that these folks need to know, and perhaps that doesn't get enough focus about this process?
Well, I don't know if it's the most important thing, but if you were to ask me what's one thing when I'm reading columns or watching a clip on cable, the most irritating thing, I believe, is when reporters and journalists will say, you know, when the voters decide the primary, and as a party chairman, I instantly think, wait a minute, the delegates decide the primary. The voters don't decide the primary. I think for a lot of the newer people that are here, I think it's really important. It's as important as understanding campaign finance laws and the difference between what a party can do and what a super PAC can do. So for the newer people here, it's important to know that delegates decide who the nominee of a party is going to be. If you were all members of, paying members of the Democrat Party or the Republican Party, 120 years ago, you all would disperse in your states, you'd elect delegates, they'd come to a national convention. Let's say now you're all delegates to the national convention, and you would pick who the nominee is. But about 120 years ago, people decided that, you know what, we're going to get more people involved in this process. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a bunch of party rules, and the rules are going to say that if David from Illinois comes to the convention, this time, instead of David deciding who he's going to support at the convention, we're going to have a statewide election. And we're going to get all these people involved in the party. But we're going to bind David's vote on the floor of the convention based on the overall outcome of the popular vote. That's how it is in some states. In other states, conventions will decide who the delegates are. And then after deciding how you're going to pick delegates, you can pick them based on a direct election onto the ballot. You can pick them by having a popular vote in your state and binding your delegate to that vote. You can also have a convention and choose delegates there. Or if you're Pennsylvania or North Dakota, you don't bind any delegates. You just say, we're going to have an election in all these congressional districts, and the delegates are going to go to the convention. They're going to do what they want to do. It's not a vote in the state of Pennsylvania or in North Dakota that tells a delegate who to vote for. The reason I bring this up is that
Heidi would say it's because North Dakotans are very wise and able to exercise independent
they just
judgment,
hate the national parties, so they don't want us telling them anything or what to do, so they're going to do what they want to do.
I'm here for you, brother.
Right. So I bring this up because I happen to believe, like campaign finance laws, if you learn the difference between what you can do with hard money and soft money, you will be so much smarter than most people involved in politics and that are writing columns, you're shaping people's opinions. And if you understood that states decide how they're going to pick their delegates, how they're going to bind their delegates, and all the rest of the things that they do, if you've got that, you're leaps and bounds ahead of most people in your business.
I want to come back to that, but Tom, you...
Great to be here, by the way. David, thanks for all you've done.
Thank you.
You know, I often, I spend a lot of time in grassroots organizing, and I'm always struck by the failure to account for the importance of grassroots organizing. There's just so many examples. Like, let me give you one in 2020. After the New Hampshire primary, there was a lot, you know, people figured that Senator Sanders was going to win that, and you know, he sort of won it, but it was, you know, it was a lot closer than people expected. And so, if you read all the talk after that election, well, you know, maybe he doesn't have momentum, and well, we'll see in Nevada. Well, Nevada was a shellacking, to quote someone you might know. And why did that happen? They had an organizing presence there for 16 months. They were, and John Ralston, who is the dean of the Nevada media empire, and whenever I want to know, by the way, here's a tip for you. If you want to know what's going on in Nevada, just read his website and then just emulate it, okay? Because he knows it. But Bernie had built a remarkable organizing operation. And it was remarkable. And here's what's remarkable about it. The Culinary Institute, the Culinary Union is the union in Nevada. And they were telling their membership in the run-up to the caucus, actually, they were telling them, don't vote for Bernie. They were telling them, vote for someone else. And they defied that, and they voted for Bernie. Mm-hmm. So, you know, organization does matter.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the best example of that, quite frankly, is 2007 and 2008, where you built that operation. And that's a big part of what parties do. So, you know, part of what we were doing in the run-up to 2020 was recognizing that we hadn't done enough of that as a party. So, and again, Reince's point about understanding how you can use money and understanding ecosystems, you're going to hear the word ecosystem from me a lot. Effective campaigns build effective ecosystems. There's the hard side. You know, we are at the party. We build the voter file. Basically, every voter, every Republican or Democratic candidate running for dog catcher to president is using the voter file, the Republican voter file, the Democratic voter file. Really important stuff that if you don't have a good one, you're not going to succeed. At the same time, you know, we built an organization called Organizing Corps because we knew that in these swing states especially, and elections are margins plays now. That, you know, that's a point you're going to hear from me time and time again. You know, if one candidate wins by 4.5%, that will be a landslide. Notwithstanding what just happened in Wisconsin in the Supreme Court race. That's a different conversation that we ought to have, by the way. But it's really important to understand that, and you should be looking at, as you're looking at campaigns, you know, who's building that organization? Because you might be inclined after one event somewhere to draw conclusions that are incorrect. And so you really want to look at what sort of organization and apparatus are candidates building? How durable does it appear to be? You should be having conversations with voters in these states to get a sense of what's the level of enthusiasm. because those things are remarkable. And, you know, Joe Biden came in second in Nevada, but that was kind of like, I don't know who came in second to Secretariat when Secretariat was running, because it was, you know, it was like 40 furlongs behind. And so when you do that, and when you, I often see the lack of attention to these details, but those sorts of details, especially in elections that are margins plays, and that is basically every important election we're involved in, are the difference between winning and losing.
Let me follow up on with both of you. Reince, with your admonition that the nominating process is all about delegates, and that process varies from state to state, how important is it for campaigns to have mastery of each state and contacts with each state and organizing, you know, political organizing within those state parties? And what does it say about this election and what the likely, I mean, how might it skew the Republican contest this year?
I think that the Trump campaign is far more sophisticated today when it comes to the knowledge of how state parties decide how they're going to allocate delegates, how they're going to run their conventions. They have smart people, Chris LaCivita, Susie Wiles. They know. I mean, to give you an idea, Chris LaCivita, when you know, in 2016, obviously I had a fiasco on my hands when it came to a primary. Some of you were there on a weekly or daily basis with me in this room. And we had a 15-person fiasco traveling the country. I feel like, given the circumstances, I held it together pretty well. And Donald Trump kept winning. And ultimately, he was winning the delegates under the rules that I described to you earlier, that were bound to them under the rule on the first ballot. So some states, they're unbound on the second ballot, the third ballot, fourth ballot. I'm going to get into that again. But just suffice it to say, he had to bind delegates to be the nominee. There was no unbind the delegate rule, as you saw when folks on the floor of our convention were saying, we got to unbind the delegates, free the delegates. It wasn't going to happen. So I had to put in place full-time operations at the RNC to manage and understand what was going to be happening at the convention. The person in charge of that operation for me to understand what was going on was Chris LaCivita.
Now,
this is a person now that is helping run the Trump operation. So this process, you know, it could potentially could be nothing, because if you have a runaway front runner, who cares? But it could be. And if it is, I would tell you that the Trump operation is out there today, while Ron DeSantis and his operation and others are thinking about getting in. They're in the states, and they're talking to the state chairman. State chairmen are filing a document in each of these states. They have to file a document with the RNC that outlines exactly how their process is going to work. Well, my guess is if you're a good presidential campaign, you're sitting there, you're meeting with people in the state party, and you're trying to figure out how they're going to draft that filing that's going to outline how they're going to run their operation. So I think over time, people are realizing more and more that this phenomena of what I'm referring to is really what drives the nomination process. If we were the Kiwanis Club today, you wouldn't allow just the entire voting universe to decide who the president of the Kiwanis Club was. It's a private political organization. There are lots of political parties for you to choose from to go and run. But my attitude is if you're going to run in our party, then you're going to follow our rules, and you're going to follow, and you're going to operate under the theory that you work for us, not the other way around.
But the point, the important point, I think, for people who are covering this is you better know what's going on in those state parties. You better understand who has the relationships with those parties, and how that might affect how delegates are apportioned and so on. You should also point out just one other thing, Tom, because I know you want to get in. One difference between the Republican Party process and the Democratic Party process is proportionality versus.
That was what I was going to talk
winner
about.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah. And let me say one more thing about Michigan. Just it's an example that illustrates your point. Right now, as you know, Michigan now has a Democratic governor and a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House, and they moved into the early window, the coveted early window for the primary. And there's a conversation right now going on within the Republican Party, and it's a totally, as is their right to do, where a number of folks, I am told, in the Trump campaign are encouraging them, don't do a primary in the early window, do a convention. Guess what happens in conventions? You have a lot more control over that process. And I've been told, and I haven't been able to confirm this, so I'm not here to confirm this, but that's why we have enterprising reporters, that the Trump operation has offered to pay for the convention. And as you know, the head of the party in Michigan is one of the election deniers who is a big Trump person. So, the difference between and by the way, if you do a convention, that's perfectly legal. So I'm not suggesting something untoward here, but what I am saying is that they are smartly, figuring out what's the process that will work best for us. And meanwhile, Governor DeSantis is on a book tour. Well, and although he did hire Ken Cuccinelli, who led Ted Cruz's floor fight
that is a mystery.
In 2016, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. But the point that I was going to make, David, about that's really important to understand is our parties, Republican and Democrat, choose their nominees quite differently. There is proportional allocation of delegates early in the Republican cycle, but after the first
March 15th.
So that's a handful of primaries.
Yeah, the rule is before March 15th, you can go proportional. You can go proportional after March 15th, but you can only go winner take all after March 15th.
And most end up going, or many, I will say, end up going winner take all after March 15th. And on the and by the way, winner take all means, like if you have a huge primary and someone gets 35% of the vote on April 1st, they get 100% of the delegates. Look at where polling is right now. Donald Trump has a very strong base of support. In a proportional allocation model, if it were proportional from soup to nuts, might be a different outcome. Maybe not. But, when the most frequently asked question I had that pissed me off because it was a stupid question. It
out here, everybody.
It was a question that you always get asked when you're running a primary and you got 25 candidates. Oh, it's going to be a brokered convention because it's proportional. And, I was like, folks, look at history. I think it was 1950-something the last time we went to a second ballot. And the reason why I said, and look at the answers I gave throughout, the other issue that happens both in Republican and Democratic primaries is the issue of momentum. A candidate gets momentum, and a lot of delegates want to be on the side of the winner, and voters want to be on the side of the winner. And especially in a moment like this, where our democracy is on fire, and it's a five-alarm blaze, that's a big factor for folks. And so that's why in 2020, South Carolina, there was a 72-hour period unlike anything I had seen. People wrote Joe Biden's obituary after New Hampshire and after Nevada. And, in a 72-hour period, it was basically over. And that's what momentum is about. And I'll bring it back to organizing. When you organize early and you're getting all like, look, DeSantis went and met with the Florida delegation, the congressional delegation, and after that meeting, those who endorsed Trump. That is not a good day for the governor.
Just on your point about organizing, and yeah, we did in 2007. We invested probably more than ever has been invested in organizing one state, Iowa, and as a result, we spent a lot of time there. We were plummeting in national polls, and there was a lot of conventional wisdom out of Washington that Obama was, and our strategy was we had to win that state if we were going to win the nomination, and if we didn't win that state, nothing else mattered, so that's what we did, and we organized the hell out of that state. But it's important, I'm just trying to keep this on stuff that is important to follow. It's important to understand, that was an important thing to follow, what we were up to and the amount of organizing we were doing in that state and how it was reflected there. So digging deep into these states, understanding both the rules and understanding the investment and the activity that people are generating, campaigns are generating, are really important. Reince, you mentioned money, and we were going to have a whiteboard up here, but we could.
I need one bigger.
This is so complex we couldn't find a big enough whiteboard. But talk about money, which has become more complex certainly over the last 12 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I just want to mention one quick thing on this delegate piece, though. But this is a good example of why it's really important for you all to dig a little bit deeper than just assuming that everything in our party after March 15th is winner take all. It might not be. It can be proportional. So when you report and say, hey, after March 15th, it's all just winner take all, that might not be true. And as Ben knows...
Explain how
well,
it can
because
be.
you can... the rule just allows for winner take all after March 15th. You can choose to go proportional if you want. But the other piece is by looking at each of the states and what they're doing, you can actually see in the filing, and you'll see, wait a minute, yeah, it is winner take all by congressional district, but in each congressional district, it's only winner take all if the person actually gets at least 25%. So it's all different. Every state's going to be different. So it's generally true that most states after March 15th are winner take all. But what that looks like in each one of the states could be very, very different. So just like, it's something that I think is it's complicated, but
to the extent that a candidate has influence
over
a state, they can
can
influence that. If someone, for example, taking up Tom's point, if you were representing someone other than Trump, you might be more inclined to try and use whatever influence you have with the state party to make it proportional in that state and to get the state to change.
Yeah, I mean, candidates that generally will appeal to the conservative base want a more closed process. A candidate that wants to appeal to the middle and is usually in a battleground state going to be someone that wants, hey, I want a big popular vote to decide who the nominee is going to be. So it all depends on what the candidate wants, but the overall general point that sophisticated candidates that are in the state parties, in the weeds today, using the rules to their advantage is absolutely the name of the game.
I want to get onto this money point because
ahead.
we're going to quickly run out of time, and I want to leave some time for questions from the group. But no, you were going to you were about to take flight on the question that I asked you, and then you
I did.
You went backwards.
So ask it again.
Just explain how money works. How money works for the party and candidates,
Right.
hard money, soft money. There'll be a more emphasis on this in
I'll
greater
do the
detail
very
later.
basic way for you to think about this. Okay, there's hard money and soft money. Okay, you're all with me? Okay. Hard money is generally candidates and parties. So the RNC, the DNC, the DCCC, the Senate Committee, the Congressional Committee, state parties, David Axelrod for whatever, whatever the name, whatever your campaign is, that's hard cash.
Give generously.
But it's limited. But it's limited. So if you were going to give me all a donation for my campaign, you're all limited based on a federal limit, and it goes up a little bit once in a while. But here's the thing. It is like the O-type blood of money. It's limited in supply, but unlimited in use. And the beauty is on the hard money side, if I go buy a television ad, I get the lowest unit rate, which is another important thing for you to learn. Because if I'm buying television ads through the Democrat Party of Wisconsin, you want to talk about the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin? The DPW raised and spent at least, I don't even know how much yet, but at least $8 million just on television. Now, keep that in your mind. Now let's go to the soft money side. Unlimited in your power to give, but very limited in use. So, you have a super PAC, and you're going to help the other candidate out. You buy $8 million with your super PAC because you don't trust the state party. You're not giving your money to the party. You want to do it your way. Or maybe a consultant talked you into doing it his or her way while they take some points on the buy.
You're making me nostalgic.
Yeah. Right. And so now your $8 million is buying TV for your candidate. The $8 million on the hard money side, this is true, was paying about $100 to $200 per ad, a 30-second ad in Milwaukee. The super PAC money was spending about $1,200 to $1,500 per 30-second ad. So that $8 million turned into $80 million on the soft side. And you can't even coordinate with the candidate on the soft money side. Let me give you another example. Let's say you say to me, I don't think you know what you're doing when it comes to data. I know you got this data program at the party. I know you think you know what you're doing. But I've got 10 billionaire friends over here, and we're going to have a conference in Palm Springs, and we're going to build the data for you. You can go spend $10 billion, but you can never give me the data file that you build if I'm running for federal office. I can't take it because you built it with unregulated, unlimited, campaign, corporate, all kinds of violations of the campaign federal election laws. And so and let me just kind of explain one other little thing. Do I have time for one more little thing?
I'd be the last to stop.
Okay, here, one more thing. Because by the way, they copied what we did, so it's all good. So when I walked into the RNC, and we were completely $26-some million in debt, I wanted to copy as much of the Obama campaign that I could. I mean, it was the pioneer of the modern political operation.
You see why I give him the extra time?
Yeah. By the way, I've made more appearances at the IOP here than all the DNC chairs combined. So that's how brave I am to come in here. But anyway, so I say, well, how can you work it together? Well, imagine this line of hard and soft money. I don't have an extra $30 million to build out a data file to compete with what Obama built. So we thought, wait a minute, if we had a business or we had an LLC that we could give something to of value in exchange, a fair market exchange in value that is sort of crossing the line between hard and soft money, then if I could give my data file, which is worth, let's just say it's worth $20 million, and I exclusively gave away my most valuable resource to this LLC over here. And this LLC has hopefully people on their board that aren't going to give away the data file to the party. And I then trusted this company over here to handle the data, and then would exchange the data file with me as I gave them something of value over the line. That's one way that you can handle this. But it is so regulated, and you have to be so careful. But just keep in mind, hard money, O-type blood, limited to what I can take, unlimited in use, soft money, no coordination, unlimited in giving.
You guys both talked about this. Tom, talk a little bit about data, which is, data is changing our lives, right? And it's certainly changed politics. When we, in 2012, we hired, I think, 54, 57 data analysts in the Obama campaign. It was never been done before, certainly not on that scale. And it ended up making a huge difference for us in a lot of different ways. And that was, like I said, prehistoric. Talk about how the parties use data, and are there things that reporters should know and track about that?
Yeah. No, I mean, wow, those lights are, I did it. Okay. Whoa. One thing about politics that I learned early on, we were talking about this in the green room, is that politics is a game of leapfrog. President Obama, David et al., they run a great campaign. They win again in 2012. You study what they did, and you try to take it to scale. We lose in 2016. I came in 2017. We studied how they were able to leapfrog in 2016, and now we're doing the same thing. Which
had a lot to do with data.
And that's why, that's the segue to this. It's all about data. Let me give you an example. I'm going to stand up for a moment, David, because I literally can't see.
Yes. That's North Korean media.
Yeah, okay. If you wanna meet a voter in Florida named Perez, one of the most important things you want to know about Perez is not just that it sounds like a Latino name, but you want to know, is it Perez de Cuba, Perez de Puerto Rico, Perez de DR, Perez de Colombia, Perez de Venezuela? When I got to the DNC, all we knew is it was Perez, and we knew where he or she lived. And you can make some extrapolation. If you're in the I-4 corridor, probably Puerto Rican. Dade County, probably this. But that's woefully inadequate. And so a big part of what we did with data is we made major investments. The person I hired to be our chief technology officer was the 30th employee at Twitter. He didn't know politics, but he knew big data. And he knew how to build systems. And he knew how to build cloud-based systems. And he knew how to partner, and we did the same thing. We replicated we call it the Democratic Data Exchange. I forgot.
Data trust.
Yours is the data trust. Same thing. If you're raising all this money on the hard side and the soft side, and then you figure out a way to exchange that information, a lot of the money, and this is really important because elections are won and lost at the margins. I'll give you a really concrete example. In Arizona, there's an organization called Chicanos por la Causa. In 2022, their C4, that's a soft side operation, invested $10 million in registering Latino voters. They registered and got out to the polls 37,000 Latino voters. Again, margins. The AG race, I think, was under 1,000. You know the rest of the data there. Elections are margins plays. And I said the word ecosystem before. Data is all about building ecosystems. And it's not just data on voters, but it's also opposition research. All that stuff on Mastriano and all, it was an Oppo researcher's dream, the 2022 cycle with some of these candidates. And that's what ecosystems are about, because there was a bunch of data, and the hard side has a lot of data on Oppo research, but The American Bridge, for instance, 80% of those articles you read about crazy things Republican candidates said came from American Bridge. And that's what ecosystems are about. So if you're trying to get a handle on this moving forward, you need to understand the rules of engagement. I, for one, Reince, I don't understand why Dan Kelly didn't go through the Wisconsin Republican Party. Dan Kelly's the Republican candidate for Supreme Court who lost by 10 points in 2020 when he was on the ballot, and they put him back on the ballot. This is nonpartisan, I'm sorry. They put him back on the ballot, and he lost by 11 points. And I was with Ben Wickler, the party chair, literally day before yesterday, and they spent literally like 25 cents on a dollar because the rules for party spending on ads allow you to get that discounted rate. And I'll never understand why the other side didn't get that money.
Let me follow up.
Sit down, Tom.
Yeah, I just can't see it. I just can't see when I'm sitting like this.
Go ahead.
I'm going to go on this side now.
Yeah, no, be my guest.
I'm trying to get away from this. So one of the things that I think is important to realize, and it's a little bit of a different take, the parties have done a good job of putting and getting everyone into their 48% bucket. If you think about what's happening across the country in these battleground states, you know as better than anybody, there are very few people deciding the outcomes of all of these elections. That's because there are actually very few people that aren't already well established in their bucket, in their Republican or Democrat bucket. Look at Wisconsin. Between the Senate race and the governor's race in 2022, there was over $120 million on the hard side spent fighting over about 50,000 people. So you're trying to poll and you're trying to analyze what's the outcome of the election going to be weeks before the election after $120 million get dumped on 50,000 people. And it's not just dumped on 50,000 people without knowing what we're doing. It's 50,000 people, and we know really what beer you drink, what car you drive, how many kids you have, how much money you make, whether your mortgage is right side up or upside down. And as far as the Hispanic data in Florida, it's real simple. Take your all voter file, compare it to a license in Experian and TransUnion, find out where the credit card spending's been for the last 5 years, and say, oh, guess what? Here are 200,000 people who spent more than 50% of their money in Puerto Rico. Well, that might be a good indication that these people just moved from Puerto Rico. So, and the crazy thing about data is if I know that I've got this pot of people who are 80%ers for Donald Trump, and they drive a red pickup and they drink Miller Lite and they've got 2 kids and blah, 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 blah. If I take that data set and you're 80%ers in Ohio, and I take that same data set and I dump it in Indiana, they're going to be 80%ers too. So when you're talking about that 50,000 people, that we're slicing and dicing every one of those 50,000. And so predicting what 50,000 people are going to do with 120 million, and then we're actually using the data to influence and persuade you on top of it, that is what is happening across America, which is why what you're seeing is 10,000 people in every one of these states are deciding who the next president of the United States is going to be.
Okay,
David,
right,
can I just say one quick thing? One thing.
Let me just say before you speak that you guys are both donating your time to this event, and the only thing that we can give you is you're going to leave here with an incredible suntan when you artificially
it's good.
induced.
We can't see a single person out there. It's great.
But the one thing I would simply urge you to do, because elections are margins plays, as I've said, but there's some remarkably fascinating stuff, scary stuff happening across America right now. I would urge you to spend time in these communities talking to folks. Don't spend time writing about the latest poll. Spend time understanding, you know, what's happening in rural Pennsylvania. I talked to a woman there who, you know, said, don't tell my husband, you know, because he'll be really mad. I'm voting for the Democrat. You know, the world of post-Dobbs. Go out to the western part of Texas or Kansas, and you know, talk to folks there. You know, don't just assume things, because right now is a remarkable moment, and you're seeing people. And, you know, I mean, Donald Trump won white college-educated women in 2016. He's not doing so hot now. Understand like what's going on. There was a 240% increase.
It kind of helped having that opponent.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
But go to these places. I really think
there's an
it's
important point here. I mean, I don't mean to cut you off. I do, but that's what you say when you do mean to cut someone off. I don't mean to cut you off. But I just because of time. First of all, you make an extraordinarily important point that I think we want to reinforce throughout, which is don't cover polls, cover voters, and don't assume anything. Gary Hart, years ago, when he was running for president in the 1980s, told me something that was the most valuable thing anyone's ever told me, which was Washington's always the last to get the news. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And a lot of you local reporters are in a well-positioned to really have a better grip on what's going on in the country, but all of you should be out and doing that. But the other point that Reince, just building on your point, it really behooves you guys to dive deep into the world of data and how it is used and how voters are being micro-targeted and how much and what models are being built to really identify the profile of a voter who is. And this is something we started in 2012, but the amount of data that's available now is so much more.
Off the charts.
It's so much more rich. Talk about the parties themselves and what role they play and what role they don't play, and the division between the state parties and the national parties.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was at the DNC, the most important two things we had to do was rebuild our infrastructure, and we've talked about data, but also rebuild trust. You know, the 2016 campaign was a debacle. We were a party divided. We had a Unity Reform Commission, and we were able to come together. And you know, we had the largest field, I think, in history in 2020, and everybody who lost came together around Joe Biden. And you see the same thing now. People recognize that our differences pale in comparison to the differences between the two parties. And so a big role of the party is through our actions. So I knew when I was running for DNC chair that if Keith Ellison and I were the two front runners, we had dinner 3 nights before the DNC election, because we knew that if half the people walked away unhappy, then we weren't going to succeed. So we agreed that whoever won, the other person was going to come together. And a big, big role of the party, David, especially, you got to understand the moment. And the big role of the party was to make sure everything we did, day in and day out, reflected our commitment to inclusion. We got rid of superdelegates. I don't need to give you a whole long primer on superdelegates because that's kind of in the rearview mirror. But superdelegates for many were a metaphor for a party that was really a party of elites when we were supposed to be the party of the people. And so that was a big role that I think we were able to play.
Right. Specifically, speaking about the Republican National Committee now, we have this unusual situation where you have a former president who basically designated the chair who's there. She was just reelected. A lot of the RNC members were there under the auspices of Trump. Does that give him an advantage in the nominating process?
I don't think so, no. And I think you saw yesterday in his tweet yesterday. I mean, he basically said, hey, I don't like the idea of doing these debates, and By the way, no one consulted me before you decided to go to these debates, and I'm not going to participate. He didn't quite say
This
it
was
like
over the rule that said if you participate in the debates, you have to pledge to support the winner of the...
Not really. I don't want to correct you, but...
No, please.
No, the rule is if you're going to... The reality is, the rule is if you're going to take the voter file of the Republican National Committee, you better pledge loyalty to the eventual nominee. I mean, it only makes sense. So that's what that is. But that was just a dispute over the debates. But as far as state parties are concerned, the RNC is a lot smaller than the DNC. We're only 168 members. Each state and territory gets 3 votes on the RNC. Guam has as much power as Texas. And so 168 people. The reality is what we try to do, and if you take most battleground states in our party, we use, the RNC supplements the state party. So the perfect scenario would be, I've got a great state chair in Wisconsin. I have a beautiful county party system with a board in each of those areas that reflect exactly what we need to get done. I've got a state chair, I've got executive director in Madison, and I've got people running the data and political and comm shop there. That's very similar to what we'd be doing at the RNC. And I'm raising money nationally, and I'm using the state party along with the money they're raising as the vehicle to execute the ground operation all across the state of Wisconsin. On the absentee ballot program, early vote program, voter contacts, that's what we do. And let me just give you
Remind me where you're from again?
Wisconsin.
Yes. Okay.
Let me just give you 1 minute. One minute.
Yeah, because we got to take questions.
Okay. You want to hear 1 minute?
Yes.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, so how it works is, I got to get out of this light.
Who's timing?
How it works, I can't escape it. How it works is,
this is really,
let me give you one, I can't do it.
Escape it. Yeah.
One example of how the voter contact program works. I'm hooked up to every municipal clerk in the state. And if you're all my targets, let's say after doing all the data and all the research and the whole voter file, you're my targets. I'm going to send you an absentee ballot request form. It's going to have your name on it. It's going to be addressed to the municipal clerk. And every day, I'm checking to see if you, my universe, are sending in your request form to the clerk. Every day I check, every day I check. I say, okay, you did, you didn't. And the people that did, I'm just monitoring you. The people that didn't, I'm knocking on your door. So that's one round. Second round, you sent in your request form. You got your ballot, but I see you didn't turn it in. And every day I'm checking. You didn't turn it in, you didn't turn it in. Now I'm deploying the ground game on your door. Knocking on your door. Hey, I know you have a ballot here somewhere because you requested it, and I can see that you got it, but you didn't turn it in. Mm-hmm. Then she turns it in. She's off the list. So that whole program takes the data, the early vote absentee ballot program, the ground game, executes it in the state that has its act together with much of the money that comes from the RNC.
Can we take some questions? We won't be able to see you. If you could describe yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah.
We can't see, we don't know who's asking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for a bunch of us who are in what you might call monochrome states, I'm really curious how to figure out what the parties are up to, or if they're up to anything, if they've just given up.
Where are you from?
There we go. I'm curious for those of us who are in monochrome states, especially monochrome states that used to be purple, but now are trending supermajority in their legislatures. I'm Rob Cheney. I'm from the Missoulian in Montana. And we're in, all across the Rocky Mountain West, we're looking for where's the competition. Is it so much of a margin game that we're not going to see anything? Or are the weaker party going to try to make a move because, literally we are the cheapest date in the Senate race, dollar per voter, but we're not seeing any activity. We can't get any attention from the national parties because it's already, the margin is gone. Is there any change in that strategy?
Well, you're going to have a Senate race up there.
Right.
And that gets you a lot of attention.
I think that may be the second or third most invested race in the country in Montana. But one thing we did in I'll use Nebraska as an example, which is a state that, number one, has a congressional seat that is swingy. And number two, if you look at minimum wage initiatives that have been passed by referendum, every red state, South Dakota, one example, I don't know if the North Dakota had it, but I remember South Dakota did it. Every red state that put in a ballot initiative on the ballot to raise the minimum wage passed it, and they were never close.
Yeah. There's a reason for that, though. It's not a partisan.
Right, but the reason I bring this up, David, is because what we try to do in states where it's a supermajority is we do other things in the organizing front to demonstrate these are our values, and you may vote Republican all the time, but you ought to take a look at it.
But here's a question, just to answer the question. The fact that you have a competitive Senate race may incentivize parties to put more of an effort into that state, like the Democratic Party, because if the Democratic nominee is getting beaten so badly there, it'll affect the Democratic
So this is an interesting point. In my experience, when we have big races in states that normally are not on the radar, the national parties play a much bigger role in actually executing the operation in those states. Because quite frankly, it makes sense, right? Because the state parties atrophy when all they do is win. So if you have a red state that's always red, most likely they fight each other more than in the battleground states. Battleground states, there's not as much infighting. There is, but not as much as if, and then, and they atrophy in execution because they're not used to it. And a lot of times the files aren't as sophisticated because they're not refreshing voter files in Montana 18 times a year like they are in most of the battleground states.
Wait. We got to take some other questions. Tom, I'll get, Well, I'm not calling on anybody. So it's whoever has the mic.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay, hi. I'm Jennifer Brandel from Harkin, Democracy SOS, Election SOS. And what I'm taking away from what you're saying so far, in terms of the advice you're giving to journalists, is understand how money works, understand how data works. Now, if I go further on, I think about, okay, well then the logical conclusion is write more stories about those things. And to me, that means the tail is yet again wagging the dog, in which the candidates and the money going into campaigns is setting the reporting agenda, because newsrooms don't have infinite reporting resources on this kind of stuff. And the concerns of citizens and their needs for what they want candidates to be talking about is again left on the cutting room floor, because you're just following what's already happening and creating more power where there's already a power imbalance. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how what you've talked about today could actually help these stories that might come out of this, could actually help regular people understand how candidates might govern and how they might actually impact their lives. Because to me, it just feels like more power, more power.
Well, I talked a lot about organizing and my sadness that we don't talk about it more. And so you should follow a candidate who's running a grassroots campaign and listen to the people. I said, don't write about the poll of the day. Spend a week understanding what voters are really thinking, and then figure out who connects. The other thing about money that we didn't have time to talk about is, we are now the majority of our money is small dollar money. People will understand that, and they will resonate with that. And you should think about writing stories about that transformation. And that's very, very important, because people, they feel agency when they give, $30 to, Judge Janet, and now she's on the court. It's very real.
I would take it, so when we talked about the delegates and remembering that the delegates choose the nominee. I don't know what state you're in, or if it's more just a national effort, but say you're in Illinois, and just go, you can look and see who the delegates were in Illinois in 2016 and 2020 on either side of the aisle, and you can see how they were bound to vote, and you can write an article that says I interviewed these 10 delegates that were delegates in 2016 and 2020. Oftentimes they repeat. And here's how they feel about the Republican field today. Here's how they feel about the direction of the party today, because their voice is going to be really important, most likely, in 2024. And I think more stories like that, as opposed to, you know, I talked to Jim Smith in Shiocton, Wisconsin, and he's really doesn't think anyone cares about his feelings. Well, that's great about Jim Smith. But if Jim Smith was a delegate in 2016 and 2020, aha, now this guy might have a big say over who the nominee's going to be.
I mean, I think your question was well put, and I just go back to what I said about 10 minutes ago, which is, yeah, you want to cover voters, you don't want to, but there is a process. And I mean, I think it's extraordinarily important to give a picture of what's going on in the country and why people are doing what they do and why they make the decisions that they make. On the other hand, there is a process that leads to a nominee that, and that process has elements that you need also to understand. And I think that's a point we're trying to make. Yes.
Good evening. My name's Josh Kane. I'm a reporter with the San Francisco Standard. I was wondering, with President Biden's announcement about running for re-election, he focused very much on culture issues, which have obviously been a major part of the lead up to what's going to be next year's election. And in response, the Republican Party put out a AI-generated ad that actually showed people like marching out of San Francisco because it was a lost city. And I'm curious what you think about both parties, how they're going to attack the culture issues, how, say, a city like San Francisco, which obviously does have some major crises, has kind of been used as a political football in some sense, and how that might apply to other cities across America in the coming election cycle.
Well, I think President Biden's going to talk about what he did and what needs to be done. And I think you're going to talk about, when he ran 4 years ago, he talked about a battle for the soul of our nation. That battle continues. And you know, people in 2016 who were part of a focus group post-election when Trump got elected and were asked, aren't you concerned about a woman's right to choose? And their answer was, oh, that's well settled. They were wrong. And so, you know, I think the president's going to talk about not only what he has done, but what we need to do and what could happen. You know, he got criticized for talking about democracies on the ballot in 2022. He was spot on. And I think he's going to continue to talk about those things because they're real. And when rights get taken away, like we've had in Dobbs, and Dobbs is not aging well. And I think Dobbs is more than about a woman's right to choose. That's enough. But it transcends a broader issue, which is freedom to make choices. And you know, you're going to see a lot of people thinking about that. And I think the contrast between the two candidates couldn't be more stark. So you're going to see a lot of what you saw in 2020, but now we have a record, and now we see the consequences of 3 Supreme Court justices. That's on people's minds.
I don't think, though, he was asking, I think he was asking a more analytical question, which is a more strategic question.
I think for the Republican Party, yeah, I think cultural issues are going to be on the ballot, and I think it's going to be important in swinging battleground states, but they cut both ways. I mean, you can see in suburban counties around parts of Milwaukee and Cleveland and Detroit, you know, that goes both ways. So, I mean, on one hand, you might win in some of those areas with suburban women, and talking about girls' sports or you know, parental rights in school. You know, okay, we're winning on that issue, but then, hey, if we're going to go back to an 1849 law that bans abortion, including life of the mother, well, now we got a problem. So, you know, those things can cut both ways, but I don't think they're going anywhere. I think they're going to be a big part of the campaign, and I think that and of course, so is the economy. And none of us know where that's heading.
Right. I think the challenge for the Republican Party is that you have a primary campaign that's going to drive people toward those issues, those cultural issues, which galvanize the Republican base.
Yeah, but I mean, it's pretty much agreed. I mean, if you think about it, and these cultural fights within our own party, there's not a lot of disagreement.
No, I understand that, but you
That's
see
the problem.
Governor DeSantis.
Well, you don't have a lot of.
Governor
You have a lot
DeSantis
of pro-life.
moving 15 weeks to 6 weeks and so on. There are pressures on these candidates that will, I think, make it harder in a general election. That often happens in when you have primaries. In terms of the president, you mentioned his announcement. I mean, I personally was surprised because, you know, he went right from there to a union event where he talked all about economic issues that weren't reflected in the announcement video. So it was an interesting strategic question. Well, why was there such a difference between those two? We'll say it felt like they're still trying to figure out how to put all those pieces together. But I think those cultural issues will drive the suburban voter, probably drive them toward Democrats. But the economic issues are ones, and Biden's identification with them, depending on where the economy is, you know, he got 5% more of those non-college white, small town and rural voters than Hillary Clinton had. And I think those were partly because culturally he felt comfortable with them. Partly his economic message was resonant. So I'm not sure what the strategy is.
It's very difficult. I mean, one of the takeaways too, I think, from my viewpoint on when I get into these conversations, and we're always trying to, you know, what's the smartest take on how things are going to turn out? I mean, the reality is 100,000 people are going to decide who the next president is. I mean, we can sit here and say it was decided because someone went too far on abortion, or they went
You
too
mean
far
100,000 across battleground states?
Across battleground states. And so you just don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah.
You have no idea what it's going to be or what's going to move those 100,000 people. But one thing's for sure, the parties and the organizations that we've been a part of are going to slice and dice and push and pull those 100,000 people every day of the week.
Okay, I think we have to slice and dice and pull toward the bar now. So everyone is, please join us for cocktails here in this room, outside and out on the porch. Remember that tomorrow we'll be over at the Rubenstein Center. And thank you so much to Reince and to Tom and to David for this really interesting conversation.